Welcome back. It's with mixed feelings that we broach this conversation because there are going to be some heavy-hitting stats here that are going to get us all thinking very deeply about the role that we need to play right now in our country, in fact, as global citizens, in a world where over 282 million people, including children, I would imagine a large segment of that, struggle to access adequate nutrition. The urgency of addressing food insecurity cannot be overstated. The ramifications of food insecurity extend far beyond, obviously, the immediate hunger pangs impacting children's physical health, their cognitive development and emotional well-being. It's one issue. And we are joined this morning by health experts, Dr. Chanel Martinison and dietitian Carrie Seedy, to help us understand this profound impact of food insecurity on children's health and well-being, and also the power of just taking one step forward in the right way, what that can actually do, because we've reached that critical gateway. So thank you so much for both of you for being here. I'm trying to make this light, but it's a pretty heavy thing.
Quite heavy.
Because young children are literally starving to death in our own country. You would understand the nutritional implications at that critical phase. But maybe, Doc, I can start with you, seeing as you're new to the couch of the space. What does, we talk about it, food insecurities, great label. These are starving kids.
Yeah.
What does that do to their well-being at that critical young stage of their life, that early childhood development?
Okay, so in our bodies are controlled by two hunger hormones, if I could call it that. So leptin and ghrelin. Ghrelin is something that is secreted by the stomach, and you know, if it is secreted, it is usually a signal to the brain saying we need food, you know, get food. And then if there's no food that comes in, there's no glucose that will go up, and ghrelin will actually just stay up, so because the glucose stays down. And obviously that then has an implication on no glucose in the body, so immediate effects of hunger for a child. If they're sitting in a classroom, their glucose is low, and they actually just cannot focus because their brain's telling them they're hungry.
Well, we've all been there. You know what that feels like.
Yeah, but imagine having that constantly. You know, it's a chronic state that their bodies are in, and it's not getting a response. So they're just never getting that increase in glucose, and then obviously that leads to the lethargy and the fatigue that carries on after that.
And that's when the knock-on effects start to kick in a number of ways, and we'll speak about the long-term effects.
Yeah.
This manifests in very different ways, and it can be underweight, it can be overweight.
Yeah.
What is going on in that physical process and how it manifests?
Yeah, so we see the double burden of both over and under nutrition with food insecurity.
Because the food that's going in is often
yes,
the least nutritious and the highest, worst calorie load.
So what we find is people that are food insecure, their diets are typically high in refined carbohydrates and sugars, high in fat. Also, we see in kids, they call it sort of the insurance hypothesis. So they don't know when they're going to eat again. So when they do have access to food, they just like pile it in. So they actually found that kids in sort of food insecure areas are actually 5 times more likely to be obese than children that are in food secure homes. But in terms of that over and under nutrition, obviously you get different levels of food insecurity. So you get the moderate one where people still have access to food. And then you get the severe cases where there's no food quality or quantities. And that's when we see the underweight kids.
And literally, I mean, from the work I've done on the ground in spaces like this, and we've got some amazing organizations literally keeping people alive every day, where up to 20 children were dying of malnutrition or basically starvation. This was pre-COVID. And these are kids that are a few kilometers away from us. When you layer this in through a few generations, the long-term health knock-on effect of this kind of lack of nutrition, what does that look like?
Yeah, I would just like to take it a step back before we get to the long-term effects. I would like us to just think about the first 1,000 days of a child's life.
For sure,
because
the most important.
That's when it actually starts. And many people think that 1,000 days of life starts at birth. It actually starts at conception. So it actually goes all the way back to the maternal state, you know, their nutrition and their well-being. So it actually starts way before we actually see the malnutrition at the end. So the first 1,000 days that is when their long-term health actually gets, you know, set for life. And it's actually 1,000 days is not long. It's from conception to 2 years old, so 24 months of a child.
Speak to any parent, they will tell you how quick that will go.
And it flies. So I mean, if you're not feeding the mother with nutritious food and then the baby, it's actually the baby's already at, you know, at the back end of it, at a deficit. And then when they actually are born, they're born into this place where there's not, like the food, the insecurity is just not that's there. So then obviously we see the effects then in the hospitals and the clinics with the severe acute malnutrition, which is obviously the worst of it, the moderate acute malnutrition, and then just chronic illness and then persistent illness that children just don't have the reserves to fight any illness that comes their way.
And this is occupying 100% of the brain while we are expecting young children to focus on other things that are going on around them. We love to label things here, and we'll use a lot of medical terms, and we'll use terms like food insecurity. The bottom line is we are talking about little children that are probably living within a 10-kilometer radius of where you are right now. We're going to start connecting the nutritional dots, because I have a feeling the roadmap is there. We can do this if we just get the right people working together. So thank you so much to both of you for being here. We're not going to let them go anywhere. If you've got any comments or questions or anything you'd like to weigh in on the conversation, please join us on the socials.
It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Welcome back as we continue our conversation with health experts, Dr. Chanel Martinison and dietitian Carrie Seedy, to help us understand the profound impact of food insecurity on our children's health, their growth and development, obviously building on what's happening in World Hunger Day activities, hopefully across the globe. Let's continue on the dark side of this narrative, Doc, and look at the long term. Let's make it real and practical. If there's no nutrition at that critical in that 1,000 days, what will happen when we talk about iron deficiencies and stunting? What does that look like in the medical world?
So anemia, there are many different forms of it, but there is iron deficiency anemia, vitamin deficiency anemia, and then anemia of chronic disease. So sometimes when a child comes in, we obviously have to check that it's, one of those and rule out whatever, is not there. But then in terms of anemia, obviously, like the word says, iron deficiency anemia. So that means a lack of iron in the diet. So when children eat, they get in macronutrients and micronutrients, and then within the micronutrients, there will be the iron, and that would come in the form of the proteins that they eat and in some of the vegetables that they eat. But if they're not getting it, they're deficient. It is not there. And then when kids come in, a lot of the times when, like I said earlier, with the persistent colds and flus and the illnesses that they get, their bodies can't fight it because the iron levels are just low. So iron, when we think about the iron, there are red blood cells in our body, and then when the sister pricks your finger and they check the HB, that's the iron that we're checking. So that needs to, we want that like well above. It's different in different age groups, the normal amount, but on average, like we want it over 10. And a lot of the times, obviously, if it's not in your diet, it will not be in your body. It's not there. So that's in terms of anemia. But then with stunting, if you see a child that is actually stunted before the age of 8, you actually have to wonder, is there another developmental delay there? Because the stunting is just something that you can see outright. But the other things is what you can't really test for it, and you can't see it in front of you. So then it must actually lead you to think, to check for the other things, the other things that could be causing the stunting, because that is obviously related to the malnutrition.
This can be very complicated, or it can be very, very simple. Where it gets complicated is when we've got to treat an individual that's now gone down this path, has progressed too far. Where it becomes really simple is we create nutritional gateways for low-income families. You're talking about just a few simple things, just iron. Just get more iron into your diet. So that being said, how do we go about building a nutritional plan for families that are forced to live on or way, way below that economic bracket where they can access their own food?
Yeah, so I think some countries have addressed this in terms of promoting sort of what they call family farming. So promoting and also developing sustainable crops and growing vegetables that are in season.
Which is happening all over South Africa as we speak. People have had to do that.
And then also addressing it just at the school level in terms of educating parents, educating children. Some schools even have developed sort of what they call, their own sort of food gardens at the schools, and they actually will provide a meal to children from that food garden. But another thing that has really helped a lot of countries is the fortification of foods like we do in South Africa. So like the fortification of maize meal and flour. We've got iodinated salt, so that's taken away sort of iodine deficiency as well. So those kind of things help, as well as South Africa also has a national school feeding program, which has made quite a big difference in this country.
I don't think people understand the link when I go into communities and we are so blessed to be able to step in there at number 99 and then feel like we are a part of this massive solution. But you get to work with those selfless individuals who do this every day, the Ladles of Love, the Rides Against Hunger, these people who are taking fortified food packs. Often the biggest knock-on effect is not the physical, it's the emotional. It's just a child feeling like for 5 minutes of their life that someone cares enough about them to do something. That speaks to the mental impact on both sides.
Yes.
What sort of other knock-on effects, when we talk about emotional and mental, and I know you're not a psychologist, but you do have
But I
to
see general,
work
yeah.
in the space so much. What knock-on effect can it have, dark and light, when it comes to this?
I'm not sure that there are any light, but
Yeah.
I'll just focus on a few of them. So like I mentioned earlier, the first 1,000 days of life, in that time, in that period, a child's brain can create up to 1,000 new neural connections every second. So
Sure.
imagine every second of that child's life, if they are stressed about their next meal, if they are having anxiety about, am I going to eat? If they are seeing the stress in the family, that constant stress that they're
gets
having,
layered down,
it stays there. And like everything is related to hormones, there's dopamine and serotonin in the brain. And if those happy hormones stay low, children are just never going to feel it, and that leads to later on in their lives leaving them to depression and anxiety, because they actually just have never experienced
Or
the
an
happy.
addiction that is right there, which offers just some respite from this traumatic. And I think that's often what
Yeah.
we forget, that this is trauma.
It's trauma.
If I could put you in front of a room full of educators, politicians, policy makers, what would you scream out to them? What do you think
Yeah.
needs to be put out there from a nutritional perspective?
So I think firstly is a lot of research into these kind of things. Like the last National Food Consumption Survey was sort of in 1999, you know.
Sure.
So
Different
there have
world.
been
Sure.
sort of smaller based studies looking at it. So identifying the problem is very important. So, you know, now that we've fortified food, what are the vitamin and mineral deficiencies we're seeing in children? So are these still relevant? You know, and from one of the studies, you know, there has been an improvement in some of the areas. So definitely, and policymakers also can affect in terms of food pricing, subsidized food. You know, ensuring there's land to do sort of family farming on, encouraging and educating in terms of food gardens and that kind of things at schools. You know, educators are quite important in terms of they're the front line with the children and the parents. So making sure schools have nutrition programs to educate about healthy eating, very important.
Yeah, it's not just about providing the food, it's about empowering with the right kind of knowledge. Thank you so much. I think we could probably sit here for the entire day and work from the higher structure down. The bottom line here is we need to do something. And the crazy thing is, we saw this during COVID, that schools were staying open to grow food as parents were there tending the gardens, going to the gogos, running the ECDs. We've been doing this. We just need to formalize it, create the structures around it so that we can reach every child. And organizations like Food Forward South Africa, Ladles of Love, who I mentioned, just two incredible organizations playing a vital role in fighting hunger, and you can help them win that fight. It is doable, but it needs all of us.